Bridges for Peace. Christians supporting Israel and building relationships between Christians and Jews in Israel and around the world. Bridges for Peace, 50 years of blessing Israel and the church through compassion and revelation. Compassion. Feeding Israel's hungry. Caring for Israel's needy. Repairing homes. Giving hope to children in poverty. Helping the Jewish people return to their ancient homeland. Assuredly, I say to you, inasmuch as you did it to one of the least of these my brethren, you did it to me. Revelation, bringing the Bible to life in its ancient context, revealing the truth of Israel's prophetic significance, telling the story of Israel's miraculous rebirth, connecting Christians and the Jewish people through a grassroots global team of Christian representatives. For God's instruction shall go forth from Zion, the word of the Lord from Jerusalem. Bridges for Peace, a Matthew 25 ministry dedicated to supporting the nation of Israel and bridging the centuries-old gap between Christians and Jews. Bridges for Peace, your Israel connection.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to part 2 of our webinar series with Noam Bedouin. Last week, Noam presented the Dead Sea Revival Project, and today's topic is Middle East water diplomacy. So I'm very excited to hear what Noam has to say. Very intriguing and vitally important subject. So my name is Reverend Peter Fast, and I'm the National Director of Bridges for Peace Canada. You just saw a little opening video. So if you were new to, if you didn't attend last week and you were new to hearing about Bridges for Peace, I hope the video explained a few things and allow me to elaborate just a little bit before we continue with today's webinar. So Bridges for Peace, we are Christians supporting Israel and building relationships between Christians and Jews in Israel and around the world. Allow me to go into a little bit of detail. Picture a coin, one coin with two sides to it. So on one side, we are a Christian organization, and what we want to do is reach out to the greater church in Canada and around the world. Of course, we're in 8 different national offices, and we're actually getting a representative office into Russia as well. And then our international headquarters is in Jerusalem, Israel. So in the nations, the purpose of that, what we want to accomplish is reaching out to the church, to the greater church, all forms of different denominations, all different stripes of Christians. We're not a denominational organization, we're interdenominational. So which means we have Christians from all different backgrounds and walks of life within the church and within Christianity. And what we want to do is we want to reach these Christians, we want to educate them on Israel. We want to educate them on the Hebraic roots of our faith as Christians. I mean, just to give you a brief example, Jesus and all the early disciples and apostles were Jewish, and the Bible is Jewish in its very nature. Hebrew in the language of the Tanakh, Older Testament, and Greek in the Newer Testament, although even in the Newer Testament, you have Hebraic thought and Jewish concepts, culture, and language coming out. So we have a Hebraic foundation of our faith as Christians. And we also want to encourage Christians to pray for Israel, to support and stand with Israel, to see Israel also through a biblical lens of what God is doing today in regathering Jews from all over the world. This reborn state of Israel after almost 2,000 years is a miracle prophesied by scriptures by prophets like Jeremiah and Isaiah and Zechariah and others. And so these are exciting times that we live in, and we want to reach out to the church. We also want to bridge the gap between Christians and Jews, because there is a gap. And mostly when you look through history, through persecution, the belief in replacement theology on behalf of many Christians and much of the church, the belief that God has replaced Israel with the church. And this had varying degrees of intensity, but often led to horrific things being penned, written, preached, and acted in brutal actions of violence, not by every Christian, of course, and not by all Christians, but by many of them, both in the Roman Catholic and in the Protestant traditions. And so we have this history of hurt, a history where there's a gap between most Christians and most Jews. And yet in the last century, some incredible things are happening as we're coming together. And Bridges for Peace is right there in the midst of that. We also encourage Christians to donate and support our programs in Israel, to pray for Israel, to volunteer in Israel and go there on educational discipleship tours. It's just incredible what we're doing. And we're also opposing all forms of Christian anti-Semitism and all forms of anti-Semitism in general, as well as we stand with the Jewish people. Now, the other side of this coin are the programs of the things that we do in Israel, showing unconditional love and compassion and reaching out to the Jewish people. So just a few statistics for you. On average, we are feeding over 22,000 needy Israelis, Jews and Arabs every single month, delivering about 60 tons of food. We repair homes, we install bomb shelters, we're working in schools with hundreds of children. We've helped 88,000 plus Jewish people make aliyah and immigrate to the land of Israel. And once many of them are in the land of Israel, we also help with additional support with our adoptions program. So at any given time, when you count, the families with the kids and stuff, at any given time, you have about 1,000 people on our adoption program receiving bedding and kitchen supplies and food, all of these kinds of aspects, critical aspects. We also have a victims of war program where we help people that have been affected by war and terrorism. We have cheer baskets that we give to on people's birthdays, anniversaries, or if they're sitting Shiva, which if a Jewish family loses a family member, close friend, they'll mourn for 7 days, and we'll show them love by visiting them, sitting with them, but also bringing them cheer baskets. So we are working in Israel all the time. Since 1976, we are doing incredible work, and we're really coming to the forefront and being known as a trusted partner with no strings attached, a trusted partner and friend in what God is doing in this relationship of bringing us together. And it's one of our jobs is reminding Israel and the Jewish people that they are loved by God, and reminding Christians that they are loved by God, as opposed to the erroneous teaching of replacement theology, as I mentioned, believing that they have been replaced and God isn't working or loves them anymore. There's various levels, as I mentioned earlier. And so we're in the gap. We're doing incredible work. You can join us. You can visit www.bridgesforpeace.com. At the end of this webinar, you'll see information as well. You can donate, you can pray, you can go on our tours, you can volunteer, you can get information. We speak in churches all across the country, as well in synagogues, Jewish community events. In the past, before COVID, we held banquets and all kinds of things. But now with COVID, we've really gone virtual, although Lord willing, we are praying for a time that will come swiftly where we'll be able to again travel with leisure and do these things and meet people face to face. But it's beginning to change, and we continue to pray for that. Anyway, we have a wonderful team right here in Bridges for Peace, Canada's national office in Winnipeg. We have a wonderful rep network. We have two of our directors that are part of this webinar, Reverend Don James, who's the National Development Director. You'll be hearing from him as he moderates the question period at the end, and our National Outreach Director, Victoria James. And so I'm going to turn it over to Victoria to introduce Noam Bedouin, our guest speaker today, especially if you weren't on last week's call and you're meeting Noam for the first time. He has an amazing presentation, very intelligent guy, and it comes with some incredible information of what's happening right now in a unique area that is overlooked by so many people. And so, Victoria, I turn the floor over to you.
Well, thank you, Peter. It's a privilege to be here again. I'm very excited about this part of Noam's presentation. So if you weren't here last week, this is for you. I'm introducing our guest speaker, Noam Bedouin. He is a native Israeli photojournalist, international speaker, and environmental artist. He founded the Dead Sea Revival Project in 2016. He is a native of Efrat, Israel, very close to Jerusalem. And after the army, Noam served as an emissary for the Jewish Agency in Boston, Massachusetts, and then traveled for a year to the Far East. And when he returned to Israel, Noam relocated to Sderot. Now, you may have heard of Sderot as the city very close to Gaza that's been the epicenter of of the tens of thousands of rockets that have been launched into this city from Gaza. And he founded the Sderot Media Center to just bring to attention to what is going on as a photojournalist. Noam has been recognized by CNN, National Geographic, and NASA for his Dead Sea educational and activism work. On Earth Day 2021, Noam founded the Middle East Ecotourism, receiving an endorsement from the United Arab Emirates, as well as the UAE Environmental Educational Institutions. Noam's wife, Adi Rabinovitz Bedouin, is also a gifted lecturer, and we shared her seminars last Holocaust Remembrance Day in 2021. The bystanders and resistance were the two that she shared with us. And I know Noam and Adi have a family as well. I first met Noam at a gathering of the Winnipeg Friends of Israel. He was giving information about the situation of the Dead Sea, and he invited people to take part on a Dead Sea boat ride, discovery boat ride. And so I knew that was something I really wanted to do. I knew I'd be in Israel in a few months. So Peter Fast and Rebecca Malloy and I had the privilege of joining Noam on one of the Dead Sea Discovery boat tours. It was a trip of a lifetime, absolutely fascinating, memorable, and I highly recommend, if you are in Israel, that you, if you're able to partake in this, that you check that out. Not only is it undescribably beautiful, things that you could never have imagined, the beauty of the Dead Sea, but the needs surrounding its very swift decline, and all that Noam is going to get into today are intriguing, fascinating, and much very important topics. So without further ado, Noam, thank you for joining us today, for presenting, for all the work you've done, and we really look forward to hearing what you're going to share with us today.
Wow. Fantastic. Thank you so much, Victoria. Thank you, Peter. Amazing introduction. Again, exciting being here once again, presenting the second part of the Dead Sea Revival story, Dead Sea Revival project. Those of you who have not been with us last week, I basically went into depth of the Dead Sea story, how on one hand, it's the lowest point on Earth. It's receding right now in the lowest in recorded history. I've been showing how that we've been expanding our ecotourism, as Victoria described very nicely, taking out a boat, which basically became the only way to explore this world wonder from up close. It became so popular and so the demand was so high to be experiencing this world wonder from up close that today you have to be booking 3-4 months in advance to actually go onto this boat. Even before tourism coming back during COVID era, it's been a very high demand by Israelis and families who are coming to visit from abroad. And in any case, that became a place for us to start expanding our aspect throughout the entire region. And I think overall today, I'll be really emphasizing how the Dead Sea story became a model case. It became a story that gives us a much better perspective of what's happening throughout the entire region. There's been always a say that water's been always a cause for war, but at the same time, it became a way for diplomacy and coexistence, building up bridges. And I'm super excited about this aspect of this work. I've been very focused ever since the Abraham peace accords that occurred. The 1 year signing of these accords was this past September 2021. And I'm actually flying to Bahrain in 3 days. So I'm very much excited for my next adventure and opening up ties with this very powerful story of the Dead Sea and creating a mutual respect and honor between the people and between cultures and religions through the aspect of water. We'll be seeing how crucial the water crisis is actually here in the Middle East and actually throughout the entire world. Not many people actually realize that. What happens here on the core The Dead Sea, the lower it gets, the more it's impacting the entire region. But being optimistic, saving the Dead Sea can give hope and future for the entire region as well as for the entire world. All the way to that extent, let me pull out my presentation and start our evening presentation with you. Middle East water diplomacy. And everything starts with the Dead Sea story. So again, we start with the map, with the regional map, seeing the close countries to Israel. It's interesting enough that every single country that's mentioned in this map actually has a say about the Dead Sea or about saving the Dead Sea, all the way to that extent, and we'll try getting deeper into the whole story. Again, satellite images of the Dead Sea receding every 20 years or so. You would see the satellite images, how this body of water is shrinking. Last week I've actually showed I showed firsthand documentation of the water receding year after year. Those are the first of a kind dramatic scenes ever captured on camera, that kind of way. And we go straight to the aspects why this is actually happening. Okay, and this is the pie for us to really acknowledge about the source of the problem, the roots of the problem, and then focusing it on that 70%. I remember last week one of the people in the audience actually asked about the Dead Sea works, the Dead Sea factories, which are pumping out the water. And you can see here the pie is 30%. Actually, it's 15% on the Israeli side, 15% on the Jordanian side. That's the cause, that's the reasoning why the Dead Sea is receding, is because the pumping out of the water for exporting minerals throughout the entire world. But this is 30% of the problem. And again, most of the green parties and media are on this aspect all the time. It is part of the problem, not the main problem. Meaning the 70% of the problem is talking about where the water is actually coming from. What's happening to the sources of the water? Meaning in one sentence, it's not a question of how much water is being pumped out of the water, out of the Dead Sea. It's a question of where's the water, what happened to that water that's supposed to be coming into the Dead Sea. And that became our focus, being the only nonprofit specifically dealing with the Dead Sea story, with Dead Sea cause. Our job is looking into the much larger story, the much larger context, and you'll see basically how deep this actually goes, involving basically regional cooperation around this story. And again, I showed this map also last week for people always to know about historical conflicts of regions. It's always great to be seeing sources of water, where the rivers actually come from. And you can see very clearly Israel's water treasures, such as the Dead Sea, the Jordan River, and the Sea of Galilee, these biblical ancient bodies of water, where were they getting their water from? Is from neighboring countries, including countries that were still in state of war with them. And overall, that became part of the story. And the main story that we'll be talking about and focusing on is actually Jordan, which is on the other side of the Dead Sea. And I'm starting with this because it's making things very clear, dealing with the roots of the problem on the long run. We have to be having an alliance around water sustainability. You'll be seeing to what kind of extent the water scarce region, the Middle East has become. But at the same time, there's no other way around it by actually working somehow together around the water issues, because without that, not much hope to be giving for saving the Dead Sea, and much more to that. And as we go on, before I forget, the Dead Sea cause became not only environmental cause, but it became a human rights aspect. And I'll explain very clearly why, because what the Dead Sea needs is actually fresh water, enormous amount of quantities of fresh water. And fresh water, of course, became a basic human right to provide to countries and nations and neighbors, like in Jordan in this sake, that just do not have enough fresh drinking water for its population. And therefore, when you get to a point, and this is the scale you actually have, if Israel does have a certain point in enough amount of water to be pouring into the Dead Sea, fresh water, not salt water, the question is what comes first? To use this enormous amount of, I'll be saying in a minute how much water the Dead Sea is missing, but the question is to use this amount of water to save a water treasure, or to use this amount of fresh water in order to provide it to a thirsty population. And of course, the first basically aspect of what comes first is, of course, drinking water for a thirsty population. That's why the solution is very complex. We have to have a very long breath, having a vision looking into the future and dealing step by step with the regional cooperation. And I'll be explaining how that the Abraham Accord is the most optimistic peace accords we actually had, I think, ever, if you ask me. It became a very warm peace treaty. And this has true hope and true influence already on the Dead Sea. Now, I'll be showing how everything actually comes together and actually affecting the Dead Sea. So if you're talking about the sources of the water of the Dead Sea, this is how the Jordan River actually looks like arriving into the Dead Sea. This small little river, around 10% for the Dead Sea actually needs from the Jordan River actually gets there. And I came out there for the first time a couple of years ago when I had the CNN on the boats. And I said, this will be a perfect opportunity to showcase to the world, look at the source of the water, look what's happening to that. So while I was on the boat, I was just filming with my regular camera, just capturing that moment of this small little stream of water coming into the Dead Sea, which was the historical flow to the Dead Sea, this small tiny stream. It's around 2 meters wide, 40 centimeters deep, that is it. And then I move the camera to the side and you have all this dry up land, 70 to 100 meters of complete dry. That basically is the Jordan River, the dried up Jordan River, and that became the source of looking up north when it's happened to the sources of the water. During the COVID era, what I've done is I was mapping the entire northern part of the Dead Sea in order to try really building access to these areas, and this spot of having these two ancient bodies, emerge together is something so spiritually amazing to be involved with. So I've done a short video exactly about this. Let's check this out.
Join me on this high-level security and strategic virtual expedition, where we will explore the emerging of two ancient and mystical water treasures, the Jordan River and the Dead Sea, shared ecosystems by Israel and its neighboring country, the Kingdom of Jordan. Both bodies of water have cultural, religious, and geographical importance. Both the Jordan River and the Dead Sea are significant to billions of people from diverse religions and countries worldwide. Over the past few years, water flowing from the Jordan River has decreased to a meager 10% of its original water flow. We will discuss water diplomacy in one of the world's most water-scarce regions, where clean and drinkable water is the most valuable asset in the Middle East. What an incredible location. Let's dive deep into the story.
So the access, by the way, to this point, we have to go through Army and security officers' authorization. Not easy to get to that point, but we're working hard to be building access to these very strategic points, specifically to be talking about these issues, because you literally see the Jordanian soldiers on the other side of the river bank, which is really close. It could look pretty tense because the river is so narrow, and the river basically is the borderline. So you can really get like 50 meters away from one another. But it's pretty exciting to see that firsthand. And that's basically part of the story, is to start looking up north, meaning you cannot talk about the Dead Sea or saving the Dead Sea, not until you actually look about what's happening to the Jordan River and what's connected to the Jordan River, the Sea of Galilee, what we call the Kinneret. This is the ultimate solution of how do we actually save the Dead Sea. And I'm already saying it now because this is straight to the point. So if we're focusing again back to our region, talking about the sources of the water, okay, you see the different water treasures. We go into the Kinneret. the sources of the water to the Kinneret. This is the Nehemiah. We actually have kayak excursions I'll be showing you firsthand in a moment. Now, the story is, in order to save the Dead Sea, if technically you would have more water in the Sea of Galilee, every year would depend on how much of water the Sea of Galilee actually has. Today, there are 2 dams on the Sea of Galilee, not letting the water flourishing to the Jordan River. In the Jordan River, you could hardly even see it on the map, almost completely dry. And the main thing with the Jordan River, the water is being used for agriculture and mainly for drinking purposes on the Jordanian side. I've actually heard firsthand from the Minister of Environment Protection that there's over 1,000 pumps on the Jordanian side pumping out water for them to drink and for them for using for agriculture. That's the point we just saw. Reaching into the Dead Sea, but technically, once you have enough water in the Sea of Galilee, by bringing water, desalinated water, into the Sea of Galilee, opening up the dams, diplomacy with the Jordan, taking out your pumps, and that's the most natural way of bringing fresh water to the Dead Sea, and that's basically looking up north, and that's the focus of connecting the Dead Sea to the region. To the Israel region in terms of the water treasures. Because without that, we cannot actually reach anywhere. So by seeing how exciting an excursion can actually get, I brought students. I had many students one summer coming with me, and I decided, let's go all the way to the sources of the water of the Kinneret, the Sea of Galilee, and go in places where not many people actually go to. And we've done an exciting kayak excursion of seeing the delta of the Jordan River into the Kinneret. So check this out.
Explore a
1-minute
key
video.
part of the historical source of water flow to the Dead Sea, kayaking through Levantine water treasures to the magical estuary where the Jordan River connects to the Sea of Galilee, the Kinneret. Experience the effects of climate change on this ancient river. Witness the Kinneret's lowest water level in recorded history. Thrill to the untouched terrain filled with wildlife and habitats. Feel the natural and spiritual merging of these 2 water treasures.
So as you can see from the video, I actually gave my interns, students, to actually put the video together to do the narration. It was very exciting to them to actually become, to feel that they're actually becoming active. But overall, a strategic move is already through ecotourism in a more creative, an adventurous sightseeing kind of way, connecting the Dead Sea story to these sources of the water through ecotourism. And that's basically part of it, by going all the way to the edge where the water actually goes into the Sea of Galilee and make that exciting for people to actually experience that. So that's part of the larger story of connecting in. And this is how we basically have our, if it's hashtags or our slogans, and every time we give a presentation or talk about, we always have these slogans, not to remember, always for us to remember the vision. If it's saving our water treasures, again, you cannot talk about the Dead Sea if you don't look about the larger picture, and restore historical flow. That's basically it. It's not until we restore and save the Jordan River, the Sea of Galilee, it's not until all that is connected together we can really reach here a sustainable solution overall. Okay, and then again, this is of course very complex, dealing with also with the other country, with a neighboring country, years to be coming to actually solve this. This is again dealing with the roots of the problem. And like I said, this is the 70% of the reasoning why the Dead Sea is receding is because the historical flow has been dried out and being used for other purposes. When I say climate change, by the way, is because this region is one of the hottest regions in the world, the Middle East, of course. Some other countries I'll be sharing, they've been going through droughts. I'll get to that point in a second. But this is how we had the vision of connecting these 3 bodies together into one story.
There are 3 historical and beautiful water treasures that exist in Israel: the Dead Sea, the Kinneret, and the Jordan River. Unfortunately, these beautiful bodies of water and their living surroundings are at risk, as the waters are at the lowest point in recorded history.
Over the years, the Dead Sea has already lost more than 1/3 of its surface area.
It disappears in dry seasons of the year.
The level is 20 centimeters below what experts consider acceptable, the so-called red line.
We, at the Dead Sea Revival Project, are advocating for a natural solution to increase these water levels. This solution would involve restoring the water levels in the Kinneret so that the fresh water can flow into the Jordan River and down to the Dead Sea, which is also in real danger. This is the natural solution that solves the main reason for the receding water level of the Dead Sea. Israel, as the global leader of water management and technology, has the ability to resolve these issues. The Dead Sea Revival Project is working to influence policymakers and the general public. There are 3 historical and
Okay, so that became basically our vision, and we never forget about that because that is a source. Interesting enough that the main reason, the main project that was out for the past over 25 years to save the Dead Sea was actually looking down south. I'm sure many of you actually heard about the Red Sea to the Dead Sea, the Peace Canal, people would actually call it, is actually one of the largest projects today in the world of building a desalination plant in the Red Sea, actually on the Jordanian side. The World Bank has promised over $10 billion for this project because they saw this project as the symbol in the Middle East of cooperation and coexistence, all the way to that extent. Already showing how the Dead Sea is a connector, and a study case how the entire Middle East can actually be learning from, all the way to that extent. By the way, only that technology of building the most largest plant in the world for desalinating water, that could already bring hope to many developing countries and third world countries of supply of water, pumping up the water from the oceans and turning it into fresh and drinkable water. Only that extent is a great achievement to be sharing with others throughout the region and the world. The main project over here actually was bringing water to Jordan. I mean, the project was sold as saving the Dead Sea from the Red Sea to the Dead Sea, but the real project was actually bringing water all the way to Amman. This project has been signed by Israel, Jordan, and the Palestinian Authority for the past over 25 years. And the reasoning why this was the only solution on the table is because Jordan, which we'll be explaining in a moment, they are in desperate need for fresh water. And they needed a source of water. Again, if you look at the map of the region, Jordan does not have any beaches or any places to actually be receiving any water sources. And therefore, for them to have the Red Sea, which is the only body of water they actually have, this is the only solution that they're thinking of, not being dependent on Israel on that aspect or any other country. They wanted to have their own source of water for supply for its population eventually. At the same time, the project for the Dead Sea, the water that was supposed to be arriving to the Dead Sea through this project was called the brine water. What's the brine water? In the desalination process, you have on one hand, when the water is sucked out from the ocean, from the sea, the salt water, on one hand, it turns into fresh, and the other side of it, all the brine, all the waste and salt actually is called the brine. And that brine was supposed to be going to the Dead Sea, not fresh water, like we said, what the Dead Sea actually needs, aka the Jordan River. And therefore, many people were completely against this project. Many scientists, ecologists, environmental people, completely against this project because they're saying that any foreign water, salt water, would just touch the Dead Sea, would ruin the Dead Sea and its delicacy and its balance of minerals and salt like no other place in the world. And therefore, many people actually were against this. And guess what? This project's been off the table in the past 3 months, officially off the table in the past 3 months. What I do know is that they're still building a plant over here to providing Jordan with the water, but this has nothing to do with the Dead Sea anymore. Meaning that today there is no official project, not by Israel, not by Jordan, to be saving the Dead Sea. It shows how much work we have to be doing. The question people always ask, are you lobbying? Who is it in front of who do you actually lobby? It's a lot of pointers to be putting your fingers on, but like I said, it's step by step. Everything starts with education and awareness, and I'm very proud to be saying we've been starting that, exposing and influencing public opinion throughout the world, and especially in our region, getting exposure, very high exposure in all of our documentation and ecotourism that we've been developing through the region. So this is now diving deeper, what's happening on the other side of the Dead Sea in Jordan. Well, it's a crucial point to understand. And this is also why, and they're also explaining about the Dead Sea, Red Sea Canal, interesting enough that they still had hope then that this will be the project to be saving the water situation in Jordan, but also the Dead Sea. So this is a short video getting a better geopolitical aspect of what's happening in terms of water in the Kingdom of Jordan, right on the other side of the Dead Sea.
Well, the $12 billion Red to Dead Sea project for replenishing the receding Dead Sea also includes plans for hydroelectric power stations and desalinated drinking water for Palestine, Jordan, and Israel. CGT and Stephanie Free takes us to Jordan and the site of what will be the biggest desalination plants in the world.
We will be pumping from the Red Sea about 2 billion cubic meters a year. And in the full project, we are going to desalinate 900 million cubic meters a year.
900 million cubic meters of water is roughly the amount of water you'd find in 350,000 Olympic swimming pools. Most of that will go to water-starved Jordan. Jordan is one of the world's poorest countries when it comes to water resources. Here, water rationing is a way of life. So building a desalination plant, that's a way out of water woes. It will be built south of here along this desert road. It's being billed as the world's biggest desalination facility. Israel will be consulting with Jordanian colleagues on technical and procedural matters.
The importance of this project also is that it will give Jordan an entry to the desalination world. We don't have much experience in desalination, while Israel has world-class experience, I think, or the best in the world.
Water pumped north from the Dead Sea will be treated at the desalination plant, and brine mixed with marine water will then be piped further north to the eroding Dead Sea. Remaining treated water will be earmarked for agriculture, industry, and consumption. The brine mixture in the first project phase is expected to cut Dead Sea erosion by 33%. The Red to Dead Sea project for pumping hydroelectric power, replenishing, and desalinating has been in planning stages for decades. Will it go through now?
Talking so long and so much about it gave me personally the doubt that it will ever happen.
It's doable. It's very much doable. I have confidence in executing this first phase at least.
Officials say the project will be in full commission in 2021. For CGTN, this is Stephanie Fried at the Dead Sea in Jordan.
Okay, so that the short video just shows us just a little bit what's happening in Jordan. Actually, Jordan is considered the 4th driest country in the world, all the way to that extent. So being realistic, no country, could be focusing of saving, a water treasure like the Dead Sea if they don't have enough drinking water for its population. Being very realistic, and that's why it became much more complex. There's no other way around it, but actually working together somehow. I was actually a nominee to be running this project, the Red Sea to the Dead Sea. I actually reached very high levels to be managing this. I'm glad I did not, because it's almost impossible to get anything done during these kind of projects. There's lots of tensions happening still between Israel and Jordan. Again, over most of the population in Jordan are Palestinian Arabs. There's a lot of tensions, and every small tensions that actually happen in Temple Mount or other things actually happening, it takes us a few steps backwards. And like I said, a few months ago, it's been officially off the table. Before I forget, actually, I did not mention the amount of water that the Dead Sea actually needs. In order to save the Dead Sea needs over 750 million cubic of fresh water. What does that number actually tells us? 750 million cubic water? If we take Israel's 5 desalination plants on the coast of the Mediterranean Sea, 5 plants we actually have, actually today it's 6. You take those 5 plants together, that's 550 million cubic water, 550 million. Okay, and that supplies over 70% today of Israel's drinking water, and the Dead Sea needs 750 million. So we're very far from actually reaching, that quantities of water. And like I said before that, reaching technically one of those days, the amount of water, what comes first? Population, a thirsty population, or saving a water treasure. And that's how complex it actually gets. So after we saw the Dead Sea is connected to Israel's water treasures, and then going to the other borders, what's happening in Jordan, we'll be getting now a better perspective what's happening throughout the entire Middle East in terms of water consumption. This is very powerful because this is the core of behind the scenes when it's happening. It also is answering what's happening throughout the entire world, affecting by this aspect. Okay, so again, the Middle East, many countries have been experiencing over 10 years of droughts, almost no water. Now, this is the first time in history that the biblical rivers of the Middle East have been dried out almost completely. One, because huge droughts, lack of management. Turkey had been using conflicts happening in Iraq and in Syria to building huge dams, not letting the Tigris River to be going flourishing through the countries. And we'll be seeing very soon a documentation how it actually looks in Baghdad. Yeah, over 9 million people actually live there, almost dried out almost completely. And again, the entire economies of you actually have a person actually crossing by foot these almighty rivers that throughout, again, biblical stories have been talking and flourishing about these rivers. And again, all these economies were dependent on these rivers. Syria, not many people actually know, but the civil war that actually began in 2011 began having lack of water for 250,000 farmers. Aquifer was completely dried out. Once you dried out the entire aquifer and water underneath the ground, there's no turning back to that. There's no other way to overcoming that. The Nile, one of the longest rivers in the world, is a huge, huge story. Lots of tensions happening over there. You got Ethiopia building huge dams. It's called the Renaissance Dam on their side. And Cairo, which is the second largest city in Africa, the 5th in the world, are very concerned about not having enough water. Over 90% of Egyptian's economy is dependent on the Nile. Okay? You have huge islands in the middle of the Nile itself. His farmer is complaining how he doesn't have enough water to be feeding his crops. And actually, one country that actually has it worse of it all, not people even realize, it's actually Iran. They have no water supply whatsoever. And there's a lot of demonstrations I'll be showing you recently that happening in Iran of diverting water sources to those who are actually closest to the Itulas, to the regime itself, and the common person is not getting enough water. These are river banks which are completely empty, and you have actually a jeep going through. So it gives you a better perspective of what's happening throughout the entire region in terms of water supply. Overall, is understanding that the Middle East, actually North Africa, MENA, are the driest region in the entire world. You have there's a water scarce clock. I'll be showing you in a second. It shows you the water availability in the world. This is during a regular time. You can see very clearly the entire Middle East and North Africa are the most scarce region in the entire world today. So again, the Dead Sea story is a much larger aspect in terms of water supply. And again, you cannot live without water, and water became a source for also in terms of conflicts, deadly conflicts, but also it could be seen later on, it became a place to be using it diplomatically and working side by side. These are recent different articles that we just popped out of what's happening in our region. We had, like I said, mentioned before, this is from towards the end of November, clashes in Iran, massive demonstrations of having lack of water and diverting water streams to those who are closest to the regime. And over here, as having different estimates when different countries are going to be completely out of water because of droughts and lack of management of these areas. So this is again the downfall of in terms of water and where things actually at. which also brought me to the understanding that the Dead Sea can become a bridge to many other water treasures throughout the entire region. So it's a much larger vision than we actually have today, being realistic where things are actually at. Where is it we actually living in this region? How Israel's living actually throughout the entire region. This is now let me flip the coin. Okay, going deep into the whole story of the Dead Sea is I did not even realize or even knew this all the way to this extent, how Israel became a global leader in water management, water technologies, and water solutions, all the way to that extent. This is a short video showing how Israel became a super global leader in this aspect, which is absolute inspiration. And the last sentence of this video shook me so hard of realizing what happens here echoes throughout the entire world. So check out and listen to the last sentence of this video, making things very exact, how this refers, I'm not sure back to Canada, but definitely to most of the world today. So let me just play this short video.
Well, in the realm of desalinization, Israel is the global leader. CCTV's Stephanie Freed visited the world's largest facility.
The Mediterranean Sea. 2.5 million square kilometers of water usually associated with surfboards, yachts, and beach holidays. But water scientists have a different vision. Vast bodies of water as resources for hydrating consumers and industry for generations. The vision turned reality happens here at Sorek Desalination Plant, the world's largest desalination facility of its kind, one of 5 plants in Israel, providing 40% of the country's drinking water at relatively low costs. Seawater sucked from the Mediterranean through industrial pipes gets filtered through membranes. Salt and debris is removed. The water is treated with advanced chemical-free bacterial agents. The end result is drinking water.
This is the finished product, desalinated water. And according to the officials here at the plant, it's a more complete water than water that hasn't had the saline removed, because in the process of desalination, minerals are added back.
Israel partners strategically on desalination tech sharing throughout the world, including with China. China's largest facility in Tianjin pumps 200,000 cubic meters of desalinated water per day.
There are several projects that are underway in the approval process, so I believe that we will see more and more desalination in China in the very near future.
Desalination's downsides: higher costs to consumers than non-desalinated water, and the environmental impact of putting post-treatment brine water back into the sea. But with the prediction that 1.8 billion people worldwide will not be able to access clean drinking water within a decade, squeezing fresh water from the world's seas and oceans may be the only viable solution for consumption needs. Stephanie Freed, CCTV, Palmahim, Israel.
Do you guys get that last sentence? 1.8 billion people in the next few years are going to be having a huge struggle in terms of water. This is the recent map. And as you can see, it's clicked on the water availability during the driest month. Most of the world today is affected. 2/3 of the world is affected by droughts, not having enough water. The demand for water is increasing by the population increasing. And again, climate change that does affect the entire region itself. And this is how urgent the situation actually is. So again, we start with the Dead Sea cause. It became a much larger understanding what's happening throughout most of the world today. That's why I did not mention Canada, because you have maybe small parts here in Canada overall. But again, most of the world's affected. And again, the solutions if we save the Dead Sea, we could actually save the world all the way to that extent. Because if we get to that point, that we could actually allocate more fresh water in order to save our neighboring and our region itself. And these kind of techniques and solutions could be saving a water treasure. These same solutions could be applied for the entire world, all the way to that extent. And by the way, this is the recent number. Okay, this is water security clock. The number here changed every 2 seconds. It grows in two to 4 people every single second. So this is the number today, a world population living in water scarce areas. So this is the challenge today. If last century, it was a century of oil, what's so called, lots of wars with the energy of oil, we have entered the century of water. And that's why everything has to do with water diplomacy, and it depends how you take it. And again, using this unifier as water, as a great bridge to be working with our neighbors, it could be a great study case and model case for the entire world to be inspired from. And diving into the whole Abraham's Accords, which I think is the most exciting thing that happened to the region in a very long time. The fact that it actually happened during this Corona crisis, during the Corona era, is something that's the contrast to it. It's been absolutely exciting, and we took the opportunity by seeing how we're able to excite people around the world with our Dead Sea excursions. We decided, hey, let's build now a platform about Israel, of expanding the entire Israel into a whole eco tour around the whole aspect of water. And like we said, water is a unifier. Water is a great way to be building up relationships, especially when they're fresh. It's a great way of conversation, and from that to start building things up. So this is what we've done. We took a team of experts and we basically built a 7-day as a basic, going through the holy sites, along with experiencing different aspects of water, sightseeing adventures, along with learning how Israel's a global leader in water from all different angles. And the starting that communication, especially with the UAE, starting with the UAE, I was very proud to be receiving my first recognition letters, if it's from the Ministry of Climate Change and Environment, seeing the value of having a vision of regional ecotourism development, of trying connecting the countries together through ecotourism. They love the concept. And the most thing I'm proud of is the education aspect, being able to touch, to touch hearts of young adults in the UAE and to inspire them about the Dead Sea story. And for them, and that's how they're exposed for the first time, maybe in the most positive way, about Israel. And through that, they actually chose their own water conservation project for them to be, adopting and self-expressing themselves creatively. I have a beautiful relationship with this arbor school, and I'm just so proud of. Again, it's from the bottom up, starting these kind of relationships of showing how water diplomacy can come in many forms. If it's ecotourism development, if it's through education. And I flew for my first time last year to the UAE. This is the Dead Sea on the other side. Again, these flights are also historical because these flights actually fly over Saudi Arabia, which never happened before. So this is how the Dead Sea actually looks like from the Jordanian side. I was very excited to actually see the Dead Sea for the first time from the other side. This is me flying all the way to Abu Dhabi. And we went straight to the climate change and environment. This is Shabib, the guy who actually wrote me the letter. And we're seeing how much we advance our relationships. This is Ari, our co-founder. And they basically put an itinerary together for us to be meeting other places. And I even reached out to Peter, not so long ago, of actually offering. We had our first eco tour, interfaith eco tour, planned for the end of March, using Environmental International Days as our timing to be planning these kind of eco tours. We had a top delegation from the UK, as you see across from the UK, and actually 2 weeks ago they called me up saying that many of them got very sick during the Omicron wave, and therefore all their plans actually have changed. But we did not lose hope, and I'll show you what is it we're actually doing instead. But just shows that there's a huge demand to be experiencing these new countries with the goggles of showing Israel-UAE collaboration and relationships around these values of water, sustainability, and actually showing how faiths can actually come together around the environmental discourse. It's very interesting how these two worlds actually come together very neatly, because we all care about nature, we all care about the land, right? And that's part of the story. Through culture is another great form of water diplomacy. I was invited, again, World Water Day, to be presenting my photography artwork in a Crossroads museum. and through culture, being able to connect people together and becoming bridges to other water treasures through culture. That was the vision as well. So this is happening in 2 months. The education aspect, we actually had a project of bringing students in exchange student programs to learning about Israel through the aspect of water conservation and water sustainability, having the Dead Sea as the study case. So I was very proud of that this was another thing that was actually on the go, the whole education and bringing students for the first time, getting to know one another through this aspect of environment, sustainability, and water. The one project I was so proud of as well is actually the mangrove foresting in the Dead Sea. There's a huge admiration for mangrove forests in the UAE. The UAE, United Arab Emirates, are 7 Emirates. They're all separated, scattered around, and each and one of these Emirates had their own conservation of their mangrove forest, which they're very proud of preserving it and developing it. And I thought this would be a great emotional aspect of actually bringing mangrove trees from the UAE to Israel, specifically to the Dead Sea's shores, where it's less salty, and actually grow them over there. This has a lot to do with also dealing with the climate change, because a lot of it absorbs 5 times more carbon than any other tree on the planet. A lot to talk about the mangroves, but there's, again, being creative, finding ways to how we could actually collaborate and getting people together and building up these relationships through these aspects of water conservation was a great deal. This is going to be in Bahrain. This is the Bahrain ambassador to Israel. This is Adi, my wife, and we're invited to the historical Independence Day of Bahrain in the middle of December. It was 50 years. It was so moving. Okay, it was a small crowd of people, and here seeing the Bahraini ambassador is standing over there, and you'd have the Bahraini national what's it called? The national I forget the word how you say it.
Anthem.
That's it. Yes, and then you had the Hatikva, the Israel's national anthem. It was very moving, very moving. And actually, right after that, I went upstairs to be broadcasting live to students in Bahrain and the UAE about this historical moment. It was very moving, very exciting to be a part of. And this is another vision we actually have with Bahrain now. This is why I'm actually flying in a few days, is developing a regional cooperation around water, around eco-tours. And again, eco-tours is a great way to be basically getting people together and experiencing from one another through this aspect. So I'm very excited about the future in terms of building all these relationships. And what's even exciting that we actually had a Hollywood film producer that loved what is it we're actually doing, and he decided that he wants to be doing his next documentary on our adventures in these countries and showing a positive impact of war diplomacy in the Middle East, to screen this around the world, to be learning it as a study case. And this is actually what we're planning. Instead of hosting a delegation, is actually focusing on a documentary on the first stage of it. This is Shabib, the guy we became very friendly with from the Environment and Climate Change Ministry. And we've been developing our relationships together through water diplomacy. And we're planning towards the end of March to be doing this, is bringing Joe and his team to be documenting, exploring the UAE together with Shabib and building up a relationship through that aspect. And we're very much excited for that. And again, you can imagine what kind of impact by having a Netflix documentary and showing, being optimistic about the region and using the water aspect as a unifier. We're very much excited for this. And literally right now, we're literally raising capital just to bring Joe and his team over, which is around $30,000, just for us to be actually doing this short film that I'm sure can raise a lot of awareness and positively around throughout the entire world. Let me connect this in 2 minutes about how this is all affected back in our region, specifically to the Dead Sea. Again, people always ask me, why going all the way to the UAE, what kind of effect this has back on the Dead Sea? And this is the proof to it. Again, this is a bit after 1 year to the signing of the peace accords, and already there is a direct solution of a historical trade deal between Israel, Jordan, and the UAE. It's an energy and water swamp.
And actually this water, we're talking about building another desalination plant in the northern part of Israel. Water, a lot of it will be going also to Jordan, but also this water will be going to the residents in north of Israel, as well as to the Sea of Galilee, which is again another part of that solution of talking about the Dead Sea, dealing with the Sea of Galilee and the Jordan River, of supplying the Sea of Galilee with more water, not being dependent on its water for drinking. And therefore, the first stage in terms of that natural solution is already on a go. This is again only after 1 year of the peace agreement, how the UAE became a mediator between countries. It shows you that this method of working on the larger scale, the regional scale in the Middle East, actually has a direct impact in our region, and specifically for our causes in terms of water diplomacy. Very powerful. Let me just show you a few minutes of this historical deal just to get a better understanding.
And with us in studio for more is our senior international affairs correspondent, Owen Alterman. But first, let's go to the United Arab Emirates and speak with our correspondent in Dubai, Bastian Burri. And Bastian, talk about, from your perspective there in the Gulf, the importance of this deal, that solar farm especially being constructed there in Jordan.
Well, it is very important because by definition, this is the biggest regional cooperation project ever undertaken between Israel and its neighbors, but also by UAE with its neighbors. We have to understand that this plan calls for primarily for the UAE-funded solar farm to provide energy mainly to Israel, which will build in return this desalination plant on its Mediterranean coast to provide water to Jordan. So the deal will not only increase the strategic importance of the relationship between Israel and the UAE, which has improved significantly since Naftali Bennett replaced Benjamin Netanyahu. But as we know and as we heard, it also should ease Jordan water crisis, also thanks to the UAE. So this solar farm, in addition, furthermore, will be built by a UAE government-owned company, Masdar. It's quite famous, I should say, here in Dubai. Generally speaking, the plans call for the solar farm to be operational by 2026, with Israel paying $180 million per year to be divided between the Jordan government and this Emirati company here, which will be involved and committed in the long term. This is also something that we have to understand, because the agreement links the electricity deal to further water purchases from Jordan, Khaled.
Right. Now, we heard the mention of the involvement of John Kerry, the former Secretary of State, now envoy for the environment, known in the Middle East for his diplomatic doings. Let's talk about what happened behind the scenes to make this deal happen.
Well, we know for a fact that, John Kerry made multiple calls and he helped to cross the finish line by several phone calls from the to Jordan Kings Abdullah II and Israeli Foreign Minister Larry Lapid. But
okay, so it goes on and on. This just shows again this historical deal, working with the UAE, which became a very warm peace, and for them to actually come closer to our region and to actually become a mediator. While this has actually happened after us signing these agreements, this water and energy deal, these were the massive demonstrations in Amman, the capital of Jordan. So it just shows how things are still very tense, things are still very fragile. Massive demonstrations happening to even though this deal is good for them, first of all, by providing them water and energy. It's not easy to be dealing with our neighbors. You can see all the Palestinian flags over there as well. So as you can see, it's not that easy as it seems, but it just shows that everything does come together, and we have to have a lot of faith to keep on going and to see how we could actually affect our region. This became our new business card, and this became our slogan, the Regional Alliance for Water Sustainability, because that's basically the ultimate solution for the Dead Sea, is by working together. And by working together, not only we solve and save a water treasure, we actually become a study case for the entire region and for the entire world, how to supply water, which is a growing demand throughout the entire world. So let me stop over here. If you have any questions, I'll be very happy to be answering. And I try going through things in 45 minutes as much as possible to try taking from a story that we started by just taking out a boat, becoming something much, much larger, much more important, much more exciting as well, that can hopefully also affect the entire region And like I said, I'm very excited to be flying to Bahrain in the next couple of days for my next adventure of connecting that country as well to the cause, and eventually connecting all these countries together around the value of water.
Wow, that was mind stretching, Noam. Thank you very, very much. And I'm sure there are questions. I know I have some questions myself. I'll start off with a couple. Please put your questions in the Q&A at the bottom. Oh, there's one in the chat. That's good. Okay.
Very good question. There has been. I'll repeat it by just explaining the questions. There's been 6 different solutions for saving the Dead Sea, including from the Fundamentarian Sea directly to the Dead Sea. And the truth is, going all the way back to Herzl, the one who actually had the vision for the Jewish state 150 years ago, he actually had the vision as well of providing water to the Dead Sea, more for using it for electricity, because the Dead Sea is the lowest place on Earth. Only having that water going down, using that for power, as a power to for the future Jewish state. That was part of it. But yeah, in terms of the Med-Israel canals, there's nothing really on the table, nothing tangible, because the terrain is much more complex, going through the Judean desert or going through all the hilltops in Judea and Samaria. And of course, the political aspect, having pipelines going out of the Palestinian territories. And of course, they will never agree to that. It's a much more complex situation dealing with the Med to the Dead Sea. However, there are people that try to push that, even though it's completely unrealistic at this point.
Thank you, Noam. There's another question there. Where could the brine be put where it wouldn't cause a problem?
That's a very good point. The video that we saw is considered an old video of the technology of the desalination process. And to be honest, the desalination process is becoming more and more greener and friendlier to the environment. The brine is not that there's been research what the brine actually does to the ocean itself. Usually it's pumped back to the ocean. But in terms of in the brine, again, just is a bit more concentrated with salt. How much does that actually have an effect on the entire ocean itself? Right now, it's a drop on the bigger scale of the ocean itself. It does not cause that much damage, and the truth is, it's not that expensive anymore. And by the way, having these extra plants, over 90%, okay, this is the first country in the world, over 90% of our drinking water will be coming from desalinated plants, all the way to that extent. And people actually would ask me, maybe I could also ask that question, people actually were thinking about that. So is desalination, is that the solution for water? Is that the solution for climate change in that aspect? If there's a lot of droughts going on? And the truth is, it's part of it. It's part of it because everything has to be starting with education and awareness. And there's not basic education how we treat the water, not taking it for granted in our first world countries. If it's until that point, we cannot depend all the way on technology and desalination plants. And of course, these are very fragile plants as well. We cannot only be dependent on desalination plants. And I'm scared to be saying that we have to be taking that into consideration, having alternatives especially during security situations, not only to be dependent on these kind of plants, which are very high risky in terms of security. I won't get more into that.
I want to go back to where you started, Noam, where you said that the problem with the 70% is that the source of the water to the Dead Sea has been disappearing, and that is because the Jordan's flow has been reduced by 90%, I believe you said, over the last 10 years. You did mention 1,000 pumps on the Jordan. Is that the main cause of that 90%, or is there another cause of the Jordan drying up?
Yeah, well, it's definitely the main story here that needs a lot of focus and rehabilitation is the Jordan River, which is almost completely dried out. Water One has been using for diverting the Jordan River for agricultural purposes from both sides.
Also, sources of the Jordan River, major rivers that go into the Jordan River are blocked off from Syria and from Jordan itself. The Yarmouk, these are biblical and ancient rivers that were flowing into the Jordan River. Those were completely blocked off by dams as well. And what I've heard from a source, like I said, over 1,000 pumps on the Jordanian bank of the Jordan River, pumping out water anytime there's water. And that's basically where, because it's not until they actually have enough drinking water we can actually deal with diplomacy of take out your pumps. If we want to save the Dead Sea, we have to have the water flourishing down to the Dead Sea naturally. That's a whole new cause, a whole new focus, a lot of work to be doing over there.
So they need more drinking water from another source so they don't take it directly from the Jordan?
Exactly, correct. And the truth is that I forgot to mention that the entire peace accords with Jordan, the Kingdom of Jordan in 95, was mainly around water supply. Israel supplies enormous amounts of water to Jordan, especially for the Sea of Galilee, and permits from the Jordan River for the peace accords. So again, another aspect of water diplomacy, which I completely forgot to be mentioning. And actually, since this new government, they actually doubled the amount of water supply to Jordan. And the way they treat it back, I mean, their media and many of their ministries are bashing Israel anytime they actually have the opportunity. I won't say this, like I said, I will not consider this as a warm peace treaty we actually have with Jordan or with Egypt in that aspect of the population. It's a strategic aspect. It's a strategic peace accord that we actually have with Jordan these days. Again, it's the longest borderline with Israel. Not having, again, the Asham, not having the kingdom over there, you would have ISIS or any other, or Iran or Iran on the Jordan River, on the Jordan River banks already. So everything has to do strategically. But again, I've never been to Jordan, to be honest. I would love to see how the Dead Sea looks from the other side. But again, there's lots of tensions going on, and I don't know how comfortable I would personally feel, to be honest. But we'll have to be getting to that at certain points. There's no doubt about it.
Before getting to Peter's next question there, Noam, you said the ultimate solution comes from increasing the flow into the Dead Sea. Can you give us some clues as to what that consists of, that ultimate solution in increasing the water that's coming from the north?
So again, what happened now with this historical deal we actually have between Israel, Jordan, and the UAE is building another desalination plant in the northern part of Israel, and then lots of that water will be going back into the Sea of Galilee. The ultimate solution for the Dead Sea, the theoretical aspect of it is until the Sea of Galilee is completely filled up. It's completely filled up, but by having desalinated water going into the Sea of Galilee, and once he had the Sea of Galilee always flourishing with water, then he could open up the dams of the Kinneret of the Sea of Galilee, and then technically having the water naturally going through the Jordan River. And then technically, once you have the pumps being out and not diverted to different agricultural or drinking purposes, then naturally you'd have the water flourishing into the Dead Sea. And that's the ultimate solution. And there's many different steps to be taking upon that, but that's the most natural and ultimate solution for the Dead Sea. Step by step, restore the historical flow.
Okay, let's ask Peter's question here about what other countries there might be that might get into the water game that could lead to further peace agreements.
I love that question. I'll tell you why. And that's part of the reason what we're hoping also for this documentary to be exposed. Again, using the water aspect, the water diplomacy, as a great connector, a unifier with our new neighboring countries that we don't have diplomatic ties with. I can tell you there are two countries on the radar right now, which I'm praying to be part of. And one is Saudi Arabia, and the second one is Indonesia. I wish I had a whole presentation just talking about Indonesia. I have a very big heart for Indonesia. I actually traveled there as an Israeli backpacker. You heard from Victoria in my short CV about how I went backpacking for 1 year to the Far East. As an Israeli, I'm not allowed into Indonesia, the largest Muslim country in the world. I have an American passport that says Israel and Jerusalem. I was born in Israel, issued in Jerusalem. And I had a long red ponytail, so I pretended to be an Irishman traveling. I had the most fascinating experience I ever had in my life traveling. Meeting people was actually in Indonesia, in North Sumatra. I was like one of the only tourists that wandering around living with the orangutans. This is a year after that tsunami, seeing people building up their lives, their homes, the resilience of the people. They have, of course, huge problems and aspects of water crises. And actually, my vision, eventually, looking in the next decade, what we're doing right now with the Abraham Accords, with the countries nearby in the Middle East, is to become a bridge, become a gateway to Southeast Asia, and to actually make peace with the Muslim world through Southeast Asia, starting with Indonesia. That's the biggest vision I personally have. So you should be in touch. I'm hoping to bring you new
It
news
gets
from
bigger
there.
and bigger, Noam. Last
really does.
question, other than a change to the ecosystem, what effects would the Dead Sea drying up have?
Well, I mean, this is a theoretical question, because you could take this and compare it to other regions around the world that had salt lakes, salt seas that were dried up and caused enormous environmental damages throughout the entire region. If it's the Salton Sea in California, you have in one of the Uzbekistani, the Stan, one of those countries, they used to be former Soviet Union countries, actually had the Oral, I think it was the Sea of, in English, in Hebrew, it's Ariel Sea, that was dried up almost completely, caused enormous amount of environment impact. If it's sand storms, bad air coming out from there or something like that. But they are saying that this could be turning into something pretty bad the more the water actually goes down. Like we've been seeing, on one hand, it's causing this phenomenon of sinkholes, which is a catastrophe of destroying the landscape itself. On the other hand, what's coming out from the Dead Sea is fresh water, because you actually have freshwater springs like we saw last week. Literally life emerging out of these regions, which is part of the prophecies as well of the Dead Sea. So it's just very interesting what is happening. I do not know what to tell you. It's both sides of the story, and we specifically shows both sides of those stories of showing that aspect. But I think it's our moral obligation to be, this is our heritage site all the way back to biblical times, and we do not want to be losing it. And this became personal because I did not know at this rate.
We're counting on you and the Lord to maintain it. So
well, amen.
We're not planning
Amen.
on losing it.
Peter,
really take it away.
Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you, Noam. What an amazing 2 webinars. I really just was so enriching and powerful. Thank you so much for your taking the time. I know it's definitely not a chore. It's like I can see it on your face. Try not to smile constantly because you love it so much. And, that's one thing. Peace and bringing these nations together and is something definitely we strive for. It's in our name, Bridges for Peace between Jews and Christians. But what an incredible, it's not just a pipe dream. It can be a reality, and we're seeing this developing in real time, from the Dead Sea to this whole diplomacy thing and nations coming together that have once been enemies, or at least very indifferent to each other, with long pasts of resentment and things like this. And so this is very exciting. I just want to say thank you so much for coming on. I don't believe this will be the last we'll ever see of you. We want to do more webinars throughout the year, just general webinars throughout the year on different subjects. So for people participating in this one, hopefully we'll see you again on other webinars, but I would love to re-engage Noam sometime in the future. His wife, Addie, who has done Holocaust lectures for us. We like to zero in on quality, excellent speakers on a variety of subjects and present them and expose people to these topics. That's the beauty of webinars. You don't have to fly to a city or fly to the other side of the world. We can all come and gather right here online and get some 5-star information. So thank you so much, Noam. Blessings on you. Thank you everybody for participating. Both of these lectures have been recorded. They will be edited and then sent out to all of you and made available. And so we want you to share these with your friends. We want to get the word out there with the Dead Sea Revival Project with these issues of water diplomacy. We look forward to the Netflix documentary. That will be smashing. We'll look forward to seeing you on the red carpet, Noam. And many blessings. And thank you once again, Noam, for being with us. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Bridges for Peace. Thank you, Peter. Thank you, Victoria. Thank you, Don. Thank you for having me. It's always a pleasure and honor. I look forward to keep on the work and informing and exciting everybody of new developments. So please do keep in touch.
Absolutely. Okay, shalom everybody, and that's it
Shalom,
for
shalom.
today. Be well.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.